Welcome to The Call to Create. I'm your host, Charlie Teal, and today we get to sit down with Eli Goodall, one of two guys behind a new music and arts fest here in Central Oregon, January 31st and February 1st, called Dark Night of the Soul. It's helping destigmatize and bring support to people dealing with depression and mental health issues. So here's our conversation with Eli. Sitting down today with Eli Goodall, phenomenal local artist, musician, producer of cool events, man of many talents, or at least we'll say
Sweet.
many talents.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I think it would 1, 2, 3, 4. It might take more than one hand.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you can say
wow.
many.
Okay. Multi-hand talents.
Multi-hand. Yeah, which is something else too.
Right, but then, yes, that's not the topic of today's show. So the cool thing I do want to, obviously the big thing that's on your horizon is the festival you have coming up. It's the end of February. Sorry.
Yeah, no, end of January.
End of January, the 1st of February.
So right. the last day and the first day.
So why don't you give us just a little overview of what the festival is, what it's all about, what it's called, where it is, all of that.
So it's called Dark Night of the Soul Festival.
Okay.
It's January 31st. It kind of starts the evening of, and then it goes throughout the day on February 1st. And it's a music and arts festival. And kind of it's all centered around suicide awareness.
Okay.
And then I think mental health and depression too, and the idea of bringing those to a point where our community, and not just our artistic community, but I think our community in large feels comfortable discussing those things. I mean, my friend Kevin Wright, who's in on this whole planning thing too, and he runs.
he's our ghost.
He's our
invisible guest here.
Yeah, like he's the Force ghost.
Right.
That show, we'll edit him. We'll edit him in later, just nodding approvingly.
We'll just green screen him in later. Yeah.
We've talked about doing something like this for a while. I think we had an evening. This year, but almost a year ago. It was in January of 2019. We just had an evening that we did, and we did it over at Spoken Word. I think we just had a couple bands play. There was almost, not quite an open mic, but kind of an open mic thing that started out. I think word got out that we were doing it, and I was contacted by, I'm not going to remember her name. But the mother of a high school student over at Ben High contacted me, and I think a couple years before that event, her son had been friends with a student at Ben High who chose to commit suicide.
Okay.
And so he was really impacted by that, and so she found out about this event, and when it had happened, he's a musician and he had actually written a song for it, and so we had him come and share. And I think that format to that open mic format is something that we've considered kind of introducing into the larger festival too. There's an art walk portion during the day on Saturday, where I think a big part of bringing the community together under stuff like this too is feeling like they're playing a part and getting to share their own story too. Okay. I think that probably the easiest way to make someone comfortable talking about mental health or suicide is to be able to share their own experience with it instead of having to talk to other people's experience.
Right.
As we definitely live in an era where kind of all these different things that might not fall into the blanket of what would be considered normal. What we've sort of maybe thought as a culture or society are these fringe things, whether it's mental health or women's rights or minorities or all that, are now beginning to make their way into the mainstream of culture and become obviously a big point of contention too, because a lot of people aren't comfortable talking about that stuff. And I think the easiest way into it is to share your own experience with it too. And so if you created a festival or an event with kind of this at its core, the idea of creating an atmosphere where that's comfortable to talk about in your community, it starts with lots of people feeling empowered to come forward and share their own stories with it. Because otherwise you just kind of sit on the fringes and you're like, I can't come talk about this because no one else is talking about it, and I feel weird. And,
yeah. Well, and what I like about the approach you're taking, which is something I've never heard of before, is you're like, it's a festival. Like, it's music and it's art and it's celebration, and I think that it's a brilliant way to help destigmatize depression and mental health and the discussion of these problems.
If when we edit, Force Ghost Kevin in over here, just have him nodding enthusiastically, because that was actually
Should I ask a question of Kevin? So Kevin. And you can just be like,
well. If I'm answering as Kevin, I should have a slightly better posture. When we first started talking about this festival, that was one of, and I'm really glad that he made this a core thing in the festival too, because I think it will probably also resonate with a lot of people. It's a lot easier to create kind of the freedom to talk about it, or a little bit more comfort if it seems less intense initially.
Yeah, right.
It's a really heavy thing to walk into a conversation or event that starts with, my best friend killed themselves, or my spouse is struggling with mental health, and that's a heavy thing to walk into. And I think his idea initially was that because of that heaviness, it's one of the things that makes approaching this topic so difficult for a community kind of talk about, is if you kind of go at it from the angle of we're going to celebrate. And the reason that we're going to celebrate is because those of us who are left here, let's celebrate what we have. Let's celebrate life. Let's celebrate the fact that we can all come together, and let's celebrate the fact that we're all here walking with each other through, like, whether we're aware of it or not, as a species, or even as a culture, or like as a community. I guess even as Bend, Oregon, we're walking in a web where all the things that we do in small ways go out and affect everyone else that we live in this community with, in very practical ways, and if you buy into it, very spiritual ways too, where everything is kind of a web that affects everything else. And I think the core idea of wanting to make it a celebration was, it gave space. I think the thing that made it click for me the most is that, because I would have come without Kevin's, I probably would have come at it from a little bit more somber angle.
Okay.
Which I think wouldn't have been the right approach. Which is, if Force Ghost Kevin was here, I think that's why it makes us a good team.
Okay.
For producing something like this, is the balance. Coming at it from this angle of celebration, for me, just reinforces this idea that grief and joy are these two kind of extreme emotions that we experience as human beings.
Right.
And if we don't find ourselves able, because of our own issues, or our own circumstances, if we don't find ourselves fully able to experience one, it becomes hard to fully experience the other two.
Yes.
Which I think is a pretty commonly accepted thing. I mean, if you stop and sit with it and realize, the deeper you experience grief, the greater it is than to experience an equal, if not greater, amount of joy, and vice versa. The greater joy you experience, the more grief can hit. And I think to have a festival that at its center is about celebration and joy also potentially opens up the space too for people to experience a level of connection with their own grief and their experience with mental health or depression or suicide too. I was gonna maybe save this for a little bit, but it seems like I think the whole festival could be summed up of this idea. There's this folk tale about a woman, and she lives alone, sort of towards the edge of town in this little hut, and she lives a pretty happy life, and she's satisfied and balanced. But every time when the night comes, the darkness comes down on her, and she goes through wave after wave of grief, and the darkness is just too much to bear at night. And it gets to the point to where she doesn't feel like she can handle it anymore. And so one day a neighbor comes over, and they're speaking, and she opens up and she says, I know that I have this life, and I know that everyone sees me through a window and this lens of, here's what I have, but every night this comes and I'm alone, and I go through this night or this darkness, and I can't go through it anymore.
Right.
And so I think the next time that this darkness comes at night, that will be it for me. And there's these woods on the other end of town, and I'm going out to the woods, and I'm going to walk into the lake, and I'm going to drown myself just because I have to do something to escape this weight that comes at night. And the neighbors, her friend, very, very distressed. And the neighbor does what they can to comfort her, but she can't really be comforted, and the neighbor leaves. And so the night comes again, and she lights a candle, and she steps outside of her home. And out there, as she steps out on the porch, she sees all her neighbors gathered, and they all have their own candle. And this really affects her. And her friend that she spoke to early in the day steps forward and says, we're not going to use violence to stop you from doing this. We understand that there's nothing that we can do to help you abate this grief. This is something that you experience. But we all thought that we would come and at least walk with you to the wood. And obviously this is a very powerful experience for her, but it doesn't make the darkness go away. And so they begin walking, and it's very silent and very somber, and they gather at the edge of the woods, and she goes through the woods, and everyone else remains outside. And as she gets through the woods into the lake, and she begins to walk into the lake, these ripples kind of start to spread outwards, but it's very transparent, and she can see the reflection of the stars down in the lake, and she thinks to herself, well, they walked with me with the candles, and I see these lights from up above, which are maybe my ancestors holding candles as well, and for tonight there's enough light that I think I can make it through. So she leaves the lake, and she comes back to the group of people, and they don't say anything. They walk with her, and she returns to her house. And the next night come, and the same thing happens. She walks out into her porch, and now there's a larger group of people. People have heard about what's happening. They've come to join this group of people, and some people don't even know the woman. Some people don't even know what they're there for. They've just come to this gathering of people. They saw the light. They came. And the same thing, they walk to the edge of the wood. Everyone remains there. She goes through the woods into the lake. She sees the reflection. It's a clear night, and she says, tonight there's enough light. She goes back, and this continues night after night after night, and the crowds continue to grow to the point to where the walk there isn't somber anymore. There's groups of kids playing in the back. There's stories shared. It almost becomes not a celebration, but there are people celebrating.
Right.
And one night, this is happening, and it happens to be overcast that night. And she gets to the woods, and she leaves an enormous crowd. There's thousands of people gathered out there celebrating, and she goes in, and she begins to step into the lake, and there's no reflection of stars, but she sees the reflection of her own one light. And she sees her face, and she reflects back on her life and on these last years of these people walking with her and the celebrations that have happened and the conversations that have happened. And then she looks back up at her candle, and she thinks to herself, with the one candle, which is her own, that tonight there's enough light.
There's enough light.
And she returns to the group, and this is a thing that continues happening, and she joins the group no longer as the person who's being supported, but as somebody who's supporting other people, because other people have come and begun to join this group that didn't have enough light, but they came and found it. And so I think that idea kind of sums up the whole idea of the festival. There's an amount of curation that goes into it, and then there's also just an amount of that energy of those people coming together under that idea. Creates its own offshoots of things, but first you have to have some kind of a nucleus or a center to have those conversations and feel safe having those conversations. And
on the thing, like what strikes me about that story and about the festival is a thing that I've really come to realize in the last year is just that none of us are making it through this life by ourselves. We're just not. Like something is going to come along that knocks you flat on your ass, and you're going to need other people there to put you back on your feet and to keep you there and to pick you up the next time.
And sometimes you're surprised by the people that those end up being in your community too. It's not always the partner or the spouse or sometimes it's out of left field.
That's definitely been my experience. And then you realize you're like, all this time, all these people were there and you just didn't see it. And it's an incredible gift when you're able to see that and you're able to say like, I think that's how community is supposed to work, right? Is it just ends up becoming this intangible, unnameable web that if it's strong, when you need it, it appears. And it could have a specific person attached to it, or it could be a group of people. And it does create this point of really powerful connection too, right? Between you and whoever it was, or whatever the group of people that was that came along and lifted you out of that. And sometimes that's all it ends up being too, is that moment of connection. I've found in those moments, it doesn't mean that I go on to be like, oh yeah, well this is my best friend so and so, and we met when the sometimes that happens too. But I think that's the I don't know, when I think about community in that way, that brings me a lot of really deep joy to that idea of that kind of like those. You get these moments with certain people where they might help lift you out of something, and that might be the only moment in your one lifetime that you have that window of connection with that person, but you had it, and it's almost more powerful and affecting because of that sometimes. And it kind of makes you, you're left kind of thinking like, how did I get that lucky to have that person show up at that moment? And you just realize you're like, I don't know how that happens. It just does.
It just does. Whatever universal forces and chaos and luck transpire to make that occur. But it does, it seems like the likelihood of it happening goes up depending on everyone's investment into that community too. You're sort of building a safety net, really, if you want to think about it like that.
The biggest thing I've learned from experiences like that is it has caused me to be far more focused on cherishing those friendships and strengthening those connections and trying to be there for other people when they need it.
Yeah.
Just because they seem to, like, when you need it, they come out of the woodwork. And
Yeah.
you're like, how did I ever get this lucky to have people stand by me like this? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think this kind of, they're like interlocking circles. It was actually funny. I was talking to my partner the other day, because inevitably with festivals comes then your budgets and how much it costs to pull off and coordinating everything. And I'm never, when it comes to stuff like this, usually the amount of work or energy isn't that daunting to me. Whatever the case is, I don't know if I've ever hit a point in my life where I feel like I haven't had the energy to do the thing that I'm trying to do, which is great. I think I might be in a minority, but the thing that that I have to wrap my head around the most is usually budgets when it comes to something like this, and the idea of pulling that off. And like, I know that I'm invested in it, and I know the people planning, but like, how do we get other people invested in this idea too?
And is this where you balance out with Kevin? Like, is he more of the budget?
I think that he's better at that. I also think that I've, without realizing it, been learning sort of this thing all along that I actually had a conversation with my wife, and I were talking the other day, and she nailed, I mean, I should give her credit. She nailed it. She was like, I think you're approaching it from this, you're combining this thing that you really care about, and then you're approaching it with these really material goals, which necessary. I mean, like, here's your number. You have to hit this number to pay. There's 3 or 4 local artists, and then we're bringing in 3 out-of-town ones too.
Okay.
But the out-of-town acts for the headliners on Saturday are bigger, and you have these amounts, or like these material goals that you have to make. So I'm holding in my head these material goals, and they're almost at this point, because of the stress of it, taking dominance over the maybe like the spiritual, the metaphysical goals of like, this is what I'm trying to create and what I want to happen, but I have to meet this thing here. And God, what did she say? I'm not going to say it as good, because I'm gonna say it, and it's gonna be like a sloppy boxer, like a bunch of sentences. But hers was just like a quick little throat chop.
Then when she watches this later, she's gonna be like,
"That's not what I said at all."
So much better.
Yeah. But she was like, "You're getting too wrapped up in the material side of how to make this thing come to light, which is where the stress is coming from." She's like, if you go back and you reset and you focus on why you want to do this, I think because I was coming at it from the aspect of like, oh God, like I've got to sell this to people. We've got our sponsorship packets. I've got to like go and sell this to people. I'm like, here's why it's good, and let me lay it out. Instead of just, I know what community around this particular topic too has done in my own life and what it's pulled me out of. I know what it does. I know what happens when there's a lack of it. I've seen what's happened to friends and loved ones. And I have a belief in this thing happening that goes beyond the physical, the material things needed to make it happen. So I don't have anything to sell anyone on, really. I just have to go and explain this thing, because it's ideally, if it is a good idea, then it's not something that is just individualistic to me. It's a human thread of connection.
Especially something like this, which reaches almost everyone. I mean, no one, like you said, no one talks about it. And yet everyone is affected by it. And so, like you say, when it's just something of such meaning It's not just important to you. Like, this transcends the individual. This reaches out to the community. And even those people who don't feel they are a part of the community.
Yes.
It's going to touch them especially.
Yeah.
And if you can just explain that to a potential sponsor or something, they're going to be like, okay,
yeah,
here's a check.
you take the like intelligence and reasoning of the gods and you put that in a beautiful, clumsy animal meat body, and it's a recipe for depression, like concocting depression out of anything. But, or at least some sort of crisis to figure out, like, even if it's not grand questions, it does seem like, whether it's because we're talking about it more and so it seems more abundant, or because we have circumstances on this planet that are making it more. But I mean, there's depression simply due to environmental, like, let alone all the individual factors. There's grand overarching, there's depression about the state of things politically, there's depression about the state of things economically, environmentally. Like, there's all these factors that just stack, and at the end of the day, whether the thing that you're overwhelmed about or in grief over is factually true or not, if you believe it is, it's a subjective truth, and it makes it actually true. Like, it creates your reality.
I mean, emotional stress, regardless of why you feel it, is real.
Yes.
Regardless of why you feel it.
That's why you're feeling it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I do think you're right that, I mean, it is a combination of factors, but I think we're finally reaching a point where actually talking about and being open about, honest about individual struggles with mental health, depression, whatever, or a family member, or like, now we're finally getting to a point where talking about it is not only accepted, it's we're finally realizing, oh, this is how you process this.
Yeah.
This is how you handle it.
It's one of the prescriptions for addressing it. It's good to, there's like, we're talking about things more and more as a society that should be talked about, right? That have kind of been on the fringes for a while, because they really do affect everyone, but not everyone was comfortable talking about them, because they were like, am I the only one that... And there's also this, combining with that, I'm not a social anthropologist, so I know that they probably always go hand in hand, but there's this air of no, if you feel like if you don't know the language around how to talk about these things, then you also can't talk about them. Right. Which, I think I'll just speak to this case, like, particularly in this thing, part of creating this conversation too is that, like, we're also creating a space where it's okay if you don't know the language yet to come and talk about it too, which I think is essential to talking about this kind of stuff in any context, no matter what it is that people have to feel, people who don't, like, you shouldn't have to you should have to put in some work on your own, but you don't need to feel like, God, like, I didn't go and research all the language or all the terms. Should I be talking to someone about this? Everyone's going to have their own viewpoints on it. And I mean, like, just because Force Ghost Kevin and I are here talking about this, it doesn't mean that we're by any means any kind of experts on mental health. Like, we have our own experience with it, our own struggles, and we've watched friends struggle through that and dealt with that.
But I think that lends an incredible authenticity to what you're doing.
Yes.
You're like, we don't know what we're talking about other than from our own personal experience.
And we're open to, like, if you know more about it or you have a totally different experience, share it. Yeah.
And if you don't know how to talk about it and you're afraid you're going to say something that will offend someone or be awkward or feel cringy, like, say it anyway.
Yeah.
And then we can all figure out how to do it better.
And then it could unlock 5 other people saying something because they're like, at least it's not going to be as bad as
right. Right. Yeah, like you can at least be the object lesson of what not to say. Everyone else will feel less constrained.
Yeah. Should you have the courage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to jump back to like how you guys got started with this, like how did this conversation come about? Because it's not something you're like hanging out drinking a beer. I think at our own,
I
assume you two were friends.
Yeah, so
back.
Kevin and I, and like in our immediate community, I think all of us have, whether it's a yearly cyclical thing or a different periods of life, but have all gone through pretty heavy depression.
Okay.
And so I think one of the things that helps pull it out of it is, especially part of the reason we're doing the festival at the end of January is because, so Suicide Awareness Month is in September, which we did do, we did a small show this year, and we kind of, that's the end goal of this festival too, is to also throughout the year kind of throw events and kind of things on topic and of the same sort of caliber and vibe that the festival is, just on a smaller scale.
Right. Okay.
Oh God, I lost my throat.
Like how you and Kevin kind of came to this.
So there's always been really open conversation about depression. I think that one of the things that helps us is the hardest portion, at least for our community, and I would imagine for most people in Bend, most people in Oregon, especially if you're not a big winter sports fanatic, which I was born here and I grew up here and I'm not a big winter, so it's every winter I do, like sometimes I have like a week where I'll scratch my head and I'll be like, why am I here? And I always remember after the winter goes away why I'm here. But I think that was part of the reason for throwing it at the end of January too. Is that's
right.
If you suffer from seasonal, that's the worst time of year if you're suffering with seasonal depression. The holidays are hard for some people too, but once the holidays are over too, then it's really a gauntlet.
Right, you're in this
to make it through until
long stretch of darkness and cold.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that our own small community has always kind of done is we're always kind of having events like these little peaks to look forward to, and whether that's weekly stuff or we've got a bigger thing planned out here. And I think that's a pretty human thing too, to have this stuff. It's not just stuff that keeps you busy, but it's stuff to look forward to. And I think that started it. And so when we talked, Kevin and I have talked before about throwing or having a kind of a music and arts festival here in Bend that's a little different. Caliber is not the right word, but it's the first word that comes to mind. So Bend throws a lot of festivals.
Yes, we do.
And it's great, and some people don't think that it's great, and some people do. And I'm not here to make a decision on either side for.
Either way, you're going to offend half
yes,
the
totally. And but they are kind of all cut from the same cloth, which I feel like everyone can agree on, and that's totally great. But there's definitely room for a more kind of an independent arts and music festival, as far as the talent and the artists that we're bringing in, the vibe that we're trying to create. And so Kevin and I have talked way before starting this thing about doing something of that in Bend. We both kind of have a history of putting together stuff like that in creative communities and kind of being spearheading it, and I guess essentially being good at throwing parties is what we're saying, like on a grand scale, or I guess a party combined with an art installation, which any really good party is an art installation. So, but then it sort of came married to this idea of, creating these events for ourselves in our own small community of like, here's how we help battle seasonal depression, or here's how we're getting through this particularly difficult period because this just happened personally and I need some stuff to look forward to, or to kind of pull my head out of getting wrapped up in this thing.
Yeah.
And so those two things married, and it was like, why wouldn't we create if we want? It was almost something that we wanted for ourselves, and then realized that it had much wider appeal than just our own little group.
Yeah.
And so, we probably talked about it right around this same time last year. And then we kind of threw a month later, or 2 months later, we threw that one at the end of January in 2019. It was just a night. We only spent like a couple weeks, probably only spent a couple weeks marketing it, advertising it. And then we kind of didn't really pitch it to anyone then. We had over 100 people just frame in and show up just the night of, and we were like, okay.
You're like, all right. Oh, there's interest in
so
this.
I think
like,
around,
it's not just the 12 of us.
Yeah,
like,
I think around March of this year is when we started planning for 2020, the one that's coming up.
Yeah, okay.
For this event, which it takes a lot of planning and coordination to pull off. It's cool because I feel like I have a lot of other creative outlets or things that I do that I don't always get to collaborate on. Which for me it's kind of like not collaborating is kind of a newer thing for me in my creative stuff over the last like 3 years or so. Before that, almost everything that I've done creatively has been a big collaboration. And so there's also been a big period of self-discovery in that too, which has been great. And I've learned that there are things that I like doing where I don't have to collaborate.
Right. An upside to that.
Yeah, but you definitely,
thing.
there's a gap missing in it. And so this is something, I mean, stuff, even the smaller scale that we're doing this first year, the amount of collaboration required is intense. I mean, I think we have weekly meetings, and we've been having them for a while about this, but even the weekly meetings, like we'll be hanging out outside of a meeting, getting a drink and talking about something else, and then something will pop into one of our heads and we'll be like, oh yeah, we got to get this thing here. And then we'll turn into a half an hour discussion of like, oh yeah, and then this needs to happen, and which inevitably then just gets rehashed at another meeting because no one's sitting there writing it down while we're having drinks. But yeah.
Wow. So last year was the first one.
Yeah. And it was kind of spontaneous last minute. We were like, well, we don't have time to pull off anything of any kind of scale or our vision for it, but let's just do a night and have a few different artists that would play. I think we had 3 or 4 different visual artists contribute pieces too that we kind of put up around Spoken Moto. So we got some artists, some visual artists in on it that first night too. But yeah, that was the first one.
And like you threw that together and you had like 100 people come out and you're like, oh,
yeah,
we've got a thing here.
Yeah, we said, oh, this is a good idea.
So the scary question is how big of a thing do you think it's going to be this year?
We have a secret number, that we're hoping for, and I think the only reason we keep it secret is for some reason it feels like,
yeah,
I don't know if it's just that it feels as a group, we feel too vulnerable as a group to share the number that we hope for, because that way there's some sort of deniability publicly. If we're like, yeah, this is what we planned for this.
Yeah, like this is exactly the number we were.
Yeah, there's also kind of we have our number, and we also don't know. There's been so much. We haven't even really started our marketing for it yet.
Right.
Posters will start going up next week. We'll have someone taking over our social media accounts to kind of manage those.
Okay.
We just give them the content, and then it's intern work. But it's kind of this thing where it's already feels like it's picking up so much steam because we've had people approach us that are kind of not even close friends that have been like, hey, I heard about the thing. I'm really excited about the thing happening.
Who are you exactly?
And we're like, that's great. worst. And so it sort of feels like it could be a repeat on a much larger scale of that first night that we held. We were like, wow, 100 people just crammed in here. And so we have some, it's hard to plan for stuff like that with a festival, but we do have sort of these scaled up plans with the last minute if it feels like there's momentum building. And then it's a difficult question of like, how much extra do you commit to anticipating this? And if you fall short, what are your losses? And does it jeopidize doing future stuff because you're like, we put so much energy and resources into this thing, and then it didn't pan out that that is the work of these things that I wish upon no one.
Well, that's the stuff that you were saying. Your wife was like, look, you're getting all caught up in the material, earth, grounded, money-based, number-based, logistics-based. It's really
hard not to, because you feel like
have to.
You do have to. It's like you have to get it, and then you have to. It's done. You did it. You know what you have to meet, and then you sort of just have to like let go of it and be like, it's not going to happen if I'm just continually looking at this thing, being like, this is what we have to do. To me, it's an unexplainable balance, but I know it when I'm in it. I know it when I'm talking about it, if I'm talking about it the way that I want to be talking about it, and if what I'm doing is like, if somebody's into this idea, I'm talking about it the right way and it's going to connect.
And I know too, like on your website, like you have all these resources that people can tap into for suicide prevention hotlines, suicide prevention training. Like there's all sorts of resources.
That was a really important thing to us too. I mean, like I said earlier, like we're not experts on this. Neither of us
I am not a therapist.
We're not therapists. We're not psychologists. But there are so many resources out there for mental health, for suicide awareness, for depression. And so kind of creating I mean, one of the big ones that there's a lot of resources for, I think, knowing statistics off the top of my head, I think for a long time, we've at the top of the statistic bracket for most likely to commit suicide has been, I think, 40 to 50 white males has been the highest bracket of.
Now I feel at risk.
Kevin and I are approaching that too, and we're like, oh God, does that mean we're on a clock?
I should watch out.
I do think I looked over statistics, and it's kind of hard to get. Any statistic can like present whatever you want it to present depending on who you. But there's a huge trend in LGBTQ teen suicide as well, which I think these two things kind of relate. There's that's another big topic that you're kind of bringing in then to this whole conversation on mental health and depression, and it's really those things are strongest when people don't feel comfortable being themselves. They feel like a part of their identity has been shunned away, and I think it's sometimes easier in the year 2019 to look around and be like, there's so many resources and there's so much support outside of the LGBTQ community for that community and acceptance. But I think something else you have to understand too is so much of that support outside of maybe your own small community comes from online forums. There's no, and so there are all these resources. There's resources like the Trevor Project, which is great. That's for LGBTQ teens, I think 14 to 24, 15 to, I don't remember, but they kind of have an age bracket.
Teen to early 20s
and the Trevor Project is great. There's Trans Lifeline. We have a bunch, that stuff listed on our website too. But there's also, and those things are amazing and they do great work, but there's also that immediate need kind of for every community to have a physical group of people outside of your friend circle to be like, come in and be yourself. And I think that's goes full circle back to like come in and celebrate who you are and all of you and what you've gone through, and then you feel free to grieve too.
And it's that what we were talking about before of people that come out of the woodwork to support you when you're really hurting.
Yes. And it's your surprise.
You're trying to develop that local community of people. It's like you don't necessarily need to know them well.
Yeah, it's such a if you want to just talk about depression, that's such a prevalent thing in human beings that everyone, regardless of your background, experiences. Most people, regardless of your background, will experience depression or have like immediate experience with someone very close to them who has.
Right.
So you kind of get all these things coming together that you want to create space for. That's kind of the work of the festival too, is creating space for all this stuff where people feel comfortable for that. So that's a lot of these weekly meetings too, is talking about how to create space for that and making sure that everyone, that's kind of like the behind the curtain stuff that not everyone knows about, all that went into making sure that but if you're there experiencing it, you feel it, you know it. So it's kind of all this behind the curtains planning that took place that creates a space where emotionally it just feels correct. Right.
So how many music acts? Six music.
Yeah, six. So we've got 3 local and 3 they're all West Coast artists.
Okay.
So we've got the music on Saturday goes from 5 to 10, and then there's after parties both nights too. So Friday and Saturday night there's after parties that are DJ'd, but there's I think Heavy Light is a local act that's playing. There's another band called Tang that's playing.
Okay.
There is Late Cube, who is another out-of-town one that we're bringing in. This Island Earth is playing. And then our 2 headliners are Water Strider, and they're kind of from the Bay Area. And then The Session, who's also from the Bay Area. And we actually just brought them up. The Session came through in September for an event that we did too, actually, and played over at Volcanic.
Nice.
But they're awesome.
And do these acts, like, are they just acts that you knew you're like, these would be fun folks to have play?
Yeah, I think around the idea of celebration, I mean, the genres are all, there's kind of a really good curve to the night. It's pretty curated as far as kind of the vibe of everyone and where we kind of felt like it was going if we laid out the lineup this way. Most of the closing acts do have a pretty strong electronic leaning too. It's definitely, as the night progresses, it gets more and more danceable too, which kind of fits the theme of celebration. I mean, the session is like as not to pigeonhole them, it's kind of like this blending of neo soul and electronic and a little bit of maybe Afrobeat rhythm. They have 2 percussionists in the band in the 5-piece that they've got.
That sounds pretty awesome.
So it's really rhythm heavy. Kind of the same thing with Water Strider. So yeah, there's definitely an arc throughout the night of going from maybe a little bit more contemplative and atmospheric, and then keeping that atmosphere, but then kind of going more to a place of celebration.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And then if that's not enough celebration, you have the after party to go celebrate further. Let the revelry continue. Right. You're like,
and then Friday night is kind of like a fundraising dinner, basically.
So
it's a smaller, it's a smaller head count.
The gala night thing.
Yes.
Right? Yes.
And we're doing the whole thing, not the after parties, but the rest of the thing is on Oregon Spirit Distillers campus.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So we're throwing it all there. Saturday, the art walk itself is indoors, and then the stage is actually set up under a heated tent outside. So we've got a much bigger space that we're running that out of. But yeah, Friday night is there's a dinner and cocktail pairings and all that, and then there'll be an after party Friday night after that dinner. So that's kind of the initial. A lot of the art will be set up in the space for that.
So are you
dinner.
doing the Friday night gala thing at
Organ Spirit too?
Organ Spirit Distillers.
Yep.
Such a cool place over there.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, they got a great thing going. So is that like, and you said that's like the fundraising aspect of it?
Yeah, there's a lot of other fundraising we're doing, but that's kind of ideally that night is to create seed money for next year.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know. I was going to ask if that's raising money for these organizations or raising money to continue the festival.
More of that, yeah. I think that if we find out that we have a surplus in our kind of before we even get to the point of raising seed money, then we probably will reach out to a couple of these the different places that we've listed as resources on our site. We'll probably reach out to a couple of them to donate stuff to.
And we'll definitely make sure to put in the show notes like all the links that you guys have on your website. We'll include in the show notes for this stuff too.
That's awesome.
And
thank you.
Yeah, hopefully try to spread to the tens of people that the show reaches.
Yeah. So the ideally it's to create seed money for next year's festival and the year after that. And we would love to see it become, we're already steps ahead with stuff like that, but it's for it to become kind of a staple. And that was one of the other, initially when we looked at places, you're over here in this whole, what are they calling it, Bend Central District?
Yes, the Bend Central District, yes.
And so, was it the Makers District for a while before that?
Well, so the Makers District is inside the Central District. Okay. We've got to do a Venn diagram here of how it all interconnects.
But that was a big, because initially we were like, well, what it would look like to, close off a block of Minnesota downtown and do this. What permits would we, we'd have to go talk to the city. How much are the permits? How much are, and I think I kind of came back and I was like, well, we have this opportunity to do it over Oregon Spirit if we want. I was like, it's right in the Central District, which I think is about to kind of explode with stuff.
Hope so.
Well, I think it's inevitable with how much stuff I know in the next year is coming into this area too, that it will happen. But I almost think that it's going to happen sooner rather than later. Like I wouldn't be surprised in 3 or 4 years to have this whole area kind of transformed with places that have come in. And that being the case, I was like, well, it kind of seems like 4 or 5 years from now, if a festival like this was happening in town, this is where we'd want it to happen anyway instead of downtown. So why not start before and kind of make it almost become too like absorbed into the community here to become like a regular thing that happens every year.
There's a ton of energy behind the people that really want to see the Central District take off and be the thing that everybody wants it to be.
It's great when creative communities and the city's interest can align like that. Because it doesn't.
Yeah. No, normally, very often it does not.
Yeah.
Or you get the, what I find happening is you get the support. There's a lot of interest from the city about what they want to happen here. And then it's just a matter of, there's always the staggered timeline of then zoning and getting everything at the bureaucratic level to line up with the vision. Yeah.
I think there have been things similar to what we're doing before, not around the idea of suicide awareness and mental health and depression, but just arts and music festivals in general that have run up against that same kind of wall.
Yeah. But but that's actually a really good point. Like, I have never heard of any other festival. Not that I'm like tied into the music festival world, but I've never heard of any other festival.
I was not either. So it's all kind of, it's new territory for me too.
But are there other festivals that focus on mental health and depression?
I feel like there are certainly, there's certainly some really cool smaller festivals out there that are kind of around the idea, around the idea of creating very free and creative space for multidisciplinary artists to come in. There's one down, it's called Form, I think, that takes place in Arcosanti, which is, I don't think it's in California. I used to think it was like down in Southern California, and then someone corrected me and said it wasn't, and it was right outside, like in the desert in Arizona or something.
Okay.
There's that. There's smaller ones, like there's a festival called Lightning in a Bottle Festival. I feel like there's a lot of smaller festivals, and I'm sure they're on the East Coast too, but I know about the West Coast ones because I'm here, that are a lot more curated, and it's not like a huge Coachella type festival where it's like we're here to be at Coachella, like we're here to do this whole Coachella thing. That are more curated and I think more intentional with the artists that they invite in, the atmosphere that they're trying to create. I don't know of any specifically that center around also becoming kind of like a community rallying point for something like mental health,
right,
and depression. So that, and it's, yeah, I don't know. We could be pioneers, or there could be 300 other people doing this in our backyard, and they're just not great at marketing.
But it sounds like you want this to grow, and you want it to last, and you want it to go year to year.
Yeah, that would be ideal. I think both for just the caliber of the artists that we'd be able to bring through the community too, and then also for the idea of it kind of becomes, it goes all the way back to like our group of friends being like, it really helps us in the winter to have these spikes of things to look forward to. If it can be a bigger thing for a larger group of people to look forward to, that's fantastic.
Right.
Then we've done what we set out to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. As we sort of wrap things up, well, first of all, where should people go to find out more about what you're up to?
So
the organization is up to.
If they go to the website, which is www.darknightofthesoulfest.com.
Just not the Dark Night of the Soul.
Yeah,
just
Dark Night of the
Dark Night of the Soul.
Mm-hmm. If you go there, I mean, that's what has our resource page too, but it has kind of info on the festival. That's where you buy tickets. So we run it. There are also tickets available at the door, but we've got like a all access pass for the full weekend, for the after parties, the dinner, everything. We've got individual tickets for the whole kind of main event, the festival circuit thing on Saturday. We've got tickets for that. We've got tickets just for the dinner. There's kind of a variety of stuff there.
And I would imagine too, for me, as a person who is planning this, you're like, please buy tickets in advance.
Yes.
So that we can plan around numbers.
It helps us. I feel like
you're like, if 300 people show up at the gate.
Yeah, as a collective, we're pretty good at kind of sussing out the energy that's surrounding it, and then making an educated actual numbers guess as to what that might translate into. But please buy tickets ahead of time. I don't think there's anyone playing something like this on the face of the planet that's like, just show up. Who knows? Who knows? Yeah.
Like, who cares if we've only sold 50 tickets going into the weekend, and then 400 people show up?
Always buy tickets ahead of time.
Yeah.
For everyone. Anytime there's a thing with tickets and you think that, I think I'll want to go to that, buy the ticket. Tap into the magic of the internet. You don't have to walk to a box office anymore. You just pull out your phone and buy the ticket. And then if you don't go, sell it to someone else.
Right. And so it's Dark Night of the Soul sorry, Dark Night of the Soul Fest?
Yes.
Dark Night of the Soul
Dark Night of the Soul wasn't available. I think it comes, I don't know where the original, I'm sure it comes from, I think it comes from a poem. I don't remember. It could very well be.
I just always default to Shakespeare because then I sound like...
probably said it at some point.
I sound far smarter in my ignorance if I reference Shakespeare.
Yeah. Good old Bill.
Yeah.
But certainly the domain Dark Night of the Soul was...
Right.
I'm sure there's a queue. I don't even know if I checked.
Right.
Dark Night of the Soul Fest.com.
Okay. And then I guess people want to find out more about the bands or any of the acts or whatever.
Yeah, so
that's all through the website as well.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And buy the tickets in advance. Any other things you have? It sounds like you have a lot of stuff going on. Is there more stuff you have going on that you want people to know about?
I mean, when it involves the festival, not really. Depending on
you're like, that's
how it's received and kind of how many people show up. There's also, other than just the yearly event, there's, we threw the kind of little one-off show back in September at Volcanic too, that we kind of just threw the festival's name out there as like somebody that was hosting the show. And if the turnout to this festival and the need for, we feel like there's a need that's like, hey, let's do events around this thing more than just once a year. Mm-hmm. That's definitely something that that would be great too.
Okay.
We kind of have other little plans and scribbles and notes written down in our back pocket for should that be the case, then should we try and launch this thing then too, and this. So there's kind of a slew of stuff that could be born out of the.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, any Instagram tags or things that you want to point people to?
I think for all our social, for Facebook and Instagram, I think it's all Dark Night of the Soul Fest.
Okay.
So I think it's the same as the website.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, right. and the event is up on Facebook too.
Okay.
Which it has all the information there, and then it also has links to the site to buy tickets, and same thing with Instagram. If you go, you get that one little tiny link in your bio, and you get one click from somebody. But then if you click on that, it pops up this thing which gives you options to go buy tickets, to go look at resources, to go find info about the festival. And
cool.
Yeah.
So Eli and Force Ghost Kevin.
Yes. Yeah.
Dude, thanks, man.
Yeah,
I can't wait.
It's my pleasure.
I'm pretty stoked about the festival. It's
me too. I'm all kinds of things about it.
Right. Awesome. Well, thanks again.
Yeah,
it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks. It was a pleasure to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. The Call to Create with host Charlie Teal is presented by Ghost Village Films and captured at OpenSpace Studio in Bend, Oregon. Subscribe and follow on YouTube, iTunes, and thecalltocreate.com.